I asked a millionaire, a therapist, and a monk for their number one life cheat, though I didn't exactly call it that when I sat down with each of them. It started as a half-serious experiment, something to fill the blank pages of a journal I had been neglecting for months. I wanted shortcuts, secrets, anything that would make life feel less like a maze and more like a path. The truth was, I was tired of chasing, tired of trying, tired of carrying the invisible weight of not knowing whether I was doing it right. If people existed who had seemingly cracked the code, one through wealth, one through wisdom, and one through stillness, I wanted to know what they knew. The millionaire was first. His office sat high above the city, glass walls stretching from floor to ceiling, the kind of view that made the streets below look like tiny veins of light. He was sharp, efficient, almost impatient with the way he measured his words, as though time was a currency he guarded as tightly as his fortune. When I asked him for his number one cheat, he leaned back in his leather chair and tapped the desk with his fingers. Leverage, he said. Just that word, like a stone dropped in water. When I asked him to explain, he told me that everything in life is about finding the lever that moves more than your own two hands ever could. Money, networks, skills, ideas, it didn't matter. Find the thing that multiplies your effort, he said, and stop wasting time on the things that don't. It was clear he had no patience for effort without scale, for energy spent without return. His world was about stacking advantages until momentum carried you further than sheer willpower ever could. A week later, I found myself in a quiet office that smelled faintly of lavender and books. The therapist had soft eyes and a voice that seemed to settle into the air without disturbing it. I asked her the same question. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked me about the last time I had felt truly at peace. The question made me uncomfortable, but I thought about a rainy morning when I had nowhere to be and no one to answer to. She nodded when I described it, as though the details mattered less than the recognition itself. My cheat, she said gently. Learn to name what you feel instead of fighting it. She explained that most suffering comes not from the feeling itself, but from the struggle against it. Anger at being angry, shame at being sad, fear of being afraid. Naming it gave it shape, and once it had shape, it became smaller, less monstrous. The more you know your own mind, she said, the less it controls you. I left her office unsettled in a different way, carrying the strange weight of truths I had avoided naming for years. The monk was last. His monastery was only an hour outside the city, but it felt like another world entirely. The air was sharp with pine, and silence stretched like a living thing between the buildings. He greeted me with a smile that seemed to fold time itself, as though he had been smiling long before I arrived and would continue long after I left. I asked him the same question, though I felt foolish saying the word cheat, in a place where everything seemed stripped of shortcuts. He laughed softly when he heard it, not unkindly. The cheat, he said, is that there is no cheat. He sat with me under a tree and explained that life only feels unbearable when we demand it be something other than it is. Pain, joy, loss, love, they arrive uninvited, and the harder we try to resist or control them, the more we suffer. The only trick, he said, is to stop asking life to be easier and start allowing it to be exactly what it is. In that acceptance, the struggle disappears. His words didn't land like advice, more like water soaking into dry ground. When I looked back at the three answers later, leverage, naming, acceptance, they didn't clash the way I expected. They fit together like pieces of a map, though not one that promised shortcuts. The millionaire taught me to stop pushing at locked doors when there were levers to pull elsewhere. The therapist reminded me that my inner world needed as much strategy as the outer one, that ignoring my feelings didn't erase them, but letting them breathe might transform them. And the monk, in his quiet way, pointed me to the truth that sometimes the only way through is surrender, not because surrender guarantees ease, but because it allows peace. I never found a single life cheat to write in bold letters across a page. Instead, I ended up with three whispers that kept circling in my mind whenever the world felt heavy. Multiply what matters, name what you feel, accept what comes. It wasn't a shortcut. It was something harder, something deeper. But maybe that was the real trick all along. The idea had started as a joke. A friend of mine, tired of hearing me complain about how life always felt like running uphill, had said, "Why don't you just ask someone who's figured it out? Get a cheat sheet to life." It stuck with me more than I wanted to admit. I didn't want to keep stumbling, wasting years on mistakes that maybe could be avoided. So I made a list of 3 people, each holding a kind of wisdom I thought I needed. A millionaire, a therapist, and a monk. 3 archetypes: wealth, psychology, and spirituality. If anyone could hand me a shortcut, surely they could. The millionaire met me in a tower of glass and steel, a place where even the silence hummed with ambition. He didn't smile much, but his presence filled the room the way a storm fills a sky. When I asked him, he gave his answer so quickly I wondered if he had rehearsed it. Leverage. Just one word, delivered with the weight of a verdict. I must have looked blank because he leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Do you know why people burn out? They think effort alone is enough. It's not. Effort is the coin. Leverage is the machine that multiplies it. He told me about delegating tasks, about compound interest, about turning one good idea into 1,000 outcomes. He didn't apologize when he admitted that relationships, even people, could be forms of leverage. Work smart, he finished, not endlessly hard. If you're still pushing alone, you're playing the wrong game. I left his office with the word echoing in my head. Leverage. It sounded powerful, even magical, but it also left me uneasy, as though I had been given a tool that could build or break, depending on how I used it. The therapist's office was the opposite. Soft chairs, warm light, walls lined with books that had the look of having been read. She didn't answer right away when I asked her. Instead, she let the silence stretch until I squirmed. Then she asked me what I wanted life to feel like. I fumbled for an answer and finally muttered something about peace. She nodded as though she expected that. "Here's my cheat," she said. "Name it. Whatever it is. The moment you feel fear, say it. The moment you feel shame, say it. Don't bury it. Don't fight it. Don't disguise it. Name it." She leaned forward slightly, her voice firm but gentle. "What we name loses power. What we hide grows teeth." She explained that most people drown in feelings because they pretend those feelings don't exist. "Stop resisting your own mind," she said. "That's the real shortcut." Her words sat heavy with me. I thought about how many times I had been angry, and then angry at myself for being angry, or ashamed, and ashamed for even feeling shame. She had called out a war I didn't realize I'd been fighting. The monk came last. His monastery was carved into the edge of the hills, a scattering of simple stone buildings surrounded by pines. He greeted me with a bow and eyes that seemed to have no edges, as though they looked straight through me. I asked him the same question, but I felt foolish the moment the words left my mouth. A life cheat sounded childish here, almost insulting. He chuckled, as though he could sense my discomfort. "The cheat," he said, "is to stop looking for cheats." He motioned for me to walk with him, and we wandered through the stillness of the courtyard. "Life is not a puzzle to be solved," he continued. "It is a river. The harder you try to control its flow, the more exhausted you become. The trick is not to fight the water, but to float with it." He looked at me and smiled. "Acceptance is not weakness. It is the strength of being unshaken." I stayed silent, unsure how to respond, but the words settled in me like seeds I knew would grow later, when I wasn't trying so hard to understand them. When I put the 3 lessons together, leverage, naming, acceptance, I realized they weren't pieces of the same puzzle so much as 3 lenses for looking at the same life. The millionaire showed me how to work with the outside world, the therapist with the inner one, and the monk with the space between both. It wasn't the cheat sheet I had hoped for, but something better. A reminder that life doesn't need a shortcut as much as it needs clarity. Multiply what matters. Tell the truth about your feelings. Stop fighting the river. Those were the closest things to cheats I would ever get, and maybe the only ones I would ever need. When the idea first came to me, it felt half ridiculous. Who goes around asking strangers or near strangers for their life cheat? Yet the more I turned it over in my head, the more it made sense. People dedicate entire lives to figuring out how to live. Surely, if I picked the right people, I could skip years of stumbling in the dark. The first person I visited was the millionaire. His office was perched on the 35th floor of a tower whose windows glittered like the surface of a blade. I sat in a waiting room of chrome and leather, rehearsing my question over and over in my head. When his assistant finally waved me in, I was struck by the view. Streets that looked like veins of light, cars like drifting sparks.
He didn't waste time with small talk.
"You wanted advice," he said, steepling his fingers. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for what you'd call your number one cheat for life." One eyebrow arched, as though the word amused him.
Cheat.
He let the silence hang just long enough for me to squirm. Then he said, "Leverage." I blinked. "Leverage? Everything," he said, "is leverage.
Time.
Money.
People.
Knowledge. Do you know why most people stay stuck? Because they think effort alone is enough. It isn't. Effort is the smallest part of the equation." He leaned forward, his voice sharp, each word clipped like a note in a ledger. "You need to find the levers that move more than your two hands ever could. Otherwise, you'll spend your life pushing at doors that were never meant to open." There was something both intoxicating and unsettling about the certainty in his tone. He spoke like a man who had discovered a secret map and followed it straight to the treasure. Yet when I left his office, the word leverage kept echoing in my mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. The therapist was next. Her office smelled faintly of lavender, and the lighting was so warm it felt like dusk even though the sun was still high outside. She smiled when I asked my question, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed her legs and tilted her head, studying me the way someone studies a puzzle. "What are you hoping I'll say?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "Something that makes it easier. Something that makes me stop feeling like I'm behind." Her eyes softened. "Here's my cheat," she said finally. "Name what you feel." I frowned. "That's it. That's everything," she said. "Most suffering isn't from the feeling itself. It's from resisting it, denying it, fighting it. You feel afraid, and then you feel ashamed of being afraid. You feel sad, and then you feel angry that you're sad. But if you name it, just name it, it loses its claws. What we hide festers. What we name shrinks." The words sank into me slowly, like dye spreading in water. I thought about the nights I'd spent beating myself up for being anxious, the days I'd felt furious at myself for being tired. I'd been adding wars on top of wars, and I hadn't even known it. Finally, I traveled to see the monk. His monastery clung to the hills outside the city, where the air smelled of pine and stone. When I arrived, he was sweeping the courtyard with a broom made of straw. He looked up at me and smiled as if he had been expecting me all along. I stumbled over my question again, embarrassed by the word cheat in such a place. But he only chuckled, the sound light as the wind through leaves. "The cheat," he said, "is that there is no cheat." I must have looked confused, because he set his broom aside and gestured for me to walk with him. We moved slowly through the courtyard, past prayer flags that fluttered like whispers. "Life is like a river," he said. "People suffer because they try to control its flow, to dam it, to force it into channels it was never meant to run. But the more you fight, the more exhausted you become. The trick is not to fight the water, but to float with it." He glanced at me, eyes crinkling with warmth. "Acceptance is the greatest strength. Not resignation, acceptance. A mountain accepts the storm, and it remains unmoved." We walked in silence after that, but it wasn't an empty silence. It felt full, like a bowl brimming with something I couldn't name yet. When I returned home, I spread their answers out in my journal like puzzle pieces. Leverage. Naming. Acceptance. At first, they felt like three entirely different languages. But the more I sat with them, the more I realized they were not contradictions. They were layers. The millionaire had shown me how to move through the outer world. The therapist had shown me how to navigate the inner one. And the monk had shown me how to hold the whole thing without drowning in it. Multiply what matters. Tell the truth about your feelings. Stop fighting the river. They weren't cheats, not really. But they were the closest thing I had ever found to a map.